The red line above it shows you the number of applications received. And as you can see, the number of applications received over the past several years, consistently over 400,000. That means to say a consistent, perpetual surplus of applications over admissions. And because of the basic math formula I talked about, that's why you see the growing backlog. Backlog, incidentally, was at about 150,000 when our government came to office in 2006. The good news is, in some of the programs, we've begun reducing the backlog, and I'll address that in a moment. So what are the possible solutions? Well, they really boil down to two very simple possible solutions. One would be a massive increase in the level of immigration to Canada, like by orders of magnitude. So if we wanted to just maintain what we would call a working inventory or a just-in-time immigration system without limiting the number of new applications, then we would have to increase overall immigration levels to over 400,000 a year. So a massive increase, an increase by orders of magnitude. Or we limit new applications, find ways to control incoming applications, or at least our obligation to process new applications, or we do a combination of both. Let me just say that there are some people suggesting that we actually open up whole new huge avenues of immigration to Canada. For example, I believe my friend Mr. Davies suggested recently that we find a pathway to permanent residency for all temporary foreign workers. Excluding those who already have a pathway to permanent residency, that would mean adding about 140,000 additional people in the immigration queue. So if we wanted to prevent the further growth of backlogs merely by increasing admissions, we'd have to increase admissions to over 400,000. If we then wanted to add new PR programs, like Mr. Davies has suggested, like for temporary foreign workers, we'd have to increase it by about another 140,000. That would bring us up to well over 500,000 permanent resident landings per year to Canada. You know, and a valid argument could be made for that. I don't think there are many Canadians that support that, but if that's where people want to go, if that's where parliamentarians or this committee wants to go, I invite you to be explicit about wanting to invite over 500,000 immigrants, essentially more than doubling immigration levels to Canada. Let Canadians participate in that debate. So some have said, I've got a little dynamic video here, some have said, we've got a mad scientist here with who's going to show you what happens when you try to do this. Some have said we should just increase processing resources for the department. Give Claudette here more money to hire more visa officers around the world so they can do these decisions faster. And that's one of the decisions that's come from the opposition, faster processing. Well, here you can see what happens when you're trying to take the demand, that is to say the number of applications we get, and put it through a funnel so it goes, you know, slowly comes. The number of people coming, the volume that is received comes through that funnel, but you see it goes up to the amount of people we can accept, which is about 250,000. So let's say we hire a whole bunch more visa officers and process the applications faster. Well, guess what? You end up with just the same number of people admitted to Canada. So that's not a solution. We do not have an operational, well, let me put it this way. Backlogs are not a function of a scarcity of operational resources in the department. Yes, our department could always function more efficiently, and we are doing that. In fact, I'll get into this perhaps in Q&A, but through our implementation of, for example, our global case management system, which is a new worldwide electronic IT platform, we are going to see, together with other aspects of modernization, we are seeing our whole system operate more efficiently. But at the end of the day, if there's not an alignment between the number of new applications and the number of admissions, it doesn't matter how quickly you can process them. You could hit your targets in the first quarter of the year. And so what if the surplus of applications over admissions end up waiting in the airport lounge? So I'm someone who believes that we should listen to Canadians on immigration. Je ne veux pas répéter les problèmes que nous voyons en Europe, par exemple, où les politiques en immigration ont été déconnectées de la volonté publique. Et donc, au Canada, heureusement, les Canadiens sont globalement très positifs envers l'immigration et la diversité. Moi, Monsieur le Président, je veux garder cet esprit d'ouverture. Mais je note qu'environ 80% des Canadiens disent qu'il faut geler l'immigration au niveau actuel ou réduire l'immigration. Consistently, we are only seeing about 10% of Canadians indicate that immigration levels are too low. About 8 out of 10 Canadians are saying that they're too high or high enough. And I point out there was just a recent study that came out this week which points out that immigrants to Canada are those who are least likely to support increased immigration levels. And that's consistent in the polling. So let's look at, my time is short, but let's look at slide 12. How have we tried to fix the problem? Well, in 2008, unfortunately, we had to overcome opposition, but we managed to pass Bill C-50, which gave the minister the capacity to limit the number of incoming applications, which power we have applied to the federal skilled worker backlog, that is the point system. As a result of which you can see, had we not taken those actions, the federal skilled worker backlog would now be over 1 million. But as a result of limiting those applications now to 10,000 a year, we are at 340,000. Is it? What is it?
Pre-C-50, 475 overall.
475 overall, and so we've had a significant reduction. Now let's turn. We've also applied the same logic to the investor immigrant program, and we are doing so with the privately sponsored refugee program. But there's one program where we have seen real problems with backlogs where we've not applied that logic, and that is parents and grandparents. So you can see the wait times, the backlog when our government came to office was 108,000. It's now 160,000. Last year we received almost 38,000 applications for the program, and on average over the course of the past decade we've been admitting about 18,000 people. So just to freeze the backlog would require that we double the number of parents and grandparents coming to about 38,000 a year, which would be moving that up from about 6% to maybe 14% of total immigration to Canada. And that would mean cutting economic immigration. So I'll close, Mr. President, by pointing out that that increasing admissions on that program, even doubling them, will not eliminate or even really significantly reduce the backlog in the program, and frankly, nor will even cutting applications in half. In closing, I just want to say to the committee, my hope, my vision, is that by using some common sense, we can, in the next few years, arrive at a just-in-time immigration program where applications received for our various programs are processed in the same year, and those people are admitted without having to wait longer than a year. And I really do hope that we can have a constructive debate about how to get to that just-in-time immigration system. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Ms. James, you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister Kenney. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak on this important issue. My first question is related to filling labour market needs here in Canada. I think that we can all agree as members of this House that we believe in immigration is needed to help fill those market needs. However, I think that we may be overlooking some of the groups of people that are already here in Canada that could also participate in our labour market that may not be fully participating in that at this point. For example, members or people from within the community of our Aboriginal community, and also our youth. So I just think that it is my viewpoint that we as a country should look at ways of increasing participation of groups that are already within Canada right now, that we get them participating fully in our economic process and in employment. And I'm just wondering, Minister Kenney, whether you would agree with my viewpoints and if you could also expand in this area.
Thank you, Ms. James. Yes, I agree entirely that, first, we all know that we will be facing a growing challenge of a shrinking labour market as the baby boomers retire and our average age, as the age of the Canadian population gets older on average. And in fact, we project that within a few years, all net labour force growth in Canada will be attributable to immigration. But I am concerned that, well, first of all, let me say, to those who think that we can solve that problem through immigration alone, they, I think, are profoundly mistaken. The C.D. Howe Institute has calculated that in order for us to merely maintain the current average age ratio in the Canadian population through immigration alone would require that we more than quadruple immigration levels to go up to about 4% intake per year of our population. So that would require us going to over 1 million immigrants a year right now, and up to and bringing in 7 million a year by the end of the decade. And so, perhaps some people think that's viable. Personally, I don't. Now, 80% of Canadians are telling us immigration levels should not be increased. And I think, you know what, those Canadians aren't saying that because they're hostile to immigration. To the contrary, they want to make sure that newcomers succeed, and we have the capacity to integrate them. And so we cannot solve the labour market challenges through immigration alone. It has to be part of the solution. Another point, I think important point is that of the immigrants that we currently receive, only about 20% of them are what we would call primary economic immigrants who are assessed according to their human capital. About 80% of immigrants who we receive are either the spouses and dependents of economic immigrants, or their subsequently sponsored family members, or people in our humanitarian classes like refugees, resettled and asylum seekers. So 8 out of 10 immigrants to Canada are not primary economic immigrants. So maybe we need to look at increasing the ratio of those who are primary economic immigrants to address the labour market shortages. But those who would seek to actually reduce the overall percentage of economic immigrants are actually undermining one of the primary objectives of immigration policy and the rationale that we present to Canadians for consistently high levels of immigration. I would finally agree entirely that we need to do a much better job of greater labour market participation in Canada. We have certain regions and populations with long-term high rates, double-digit rates of unemployment. We should not be in a situation where we have some regions in the country where businesses, double-digit unemployment, but businesses are telling us they cannot get Canadians to work and they need to bring in temporary foreign workers. There's something profoundly wrong with that. So whether it's helping Aboriginal Canadians in the West, for example, to move to gainful employment, or other labour market remedies, we do need to increase participation in the workforce by people who are already in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for coming. I don't want to quibble with numbers, as you've thrown a lot of numbers out, but you said that Canada let in 8%, highest in history. Actually, it's a little misleading, isn't it? You let in 8% of population last year when you let in 280,000.
0.8%.
0.8%. Canada's population is 34,619,000. You said there's an average of 254,000 over the past 5 years. That's 7.3% of population. So what you meant was you've let in 7.3%, pardon me, 0.7% population, and we hit 0.8% last year only. Is that right?
Well, Mr. Davies, if you want to quibble over stats, the 0.8% is the general average over the last decade plus in terms of the immigration and permanent residents to Canada. But if you want to get into discussion about statistics, I'm delighted because you keep putting out statistics that say that that Canada has reduced. No, that is Canada has reduced immigration levels and so on by comparing one year's landings, 2006, to another year's landings, 2010. And what I invite you to do is, if you want to avoid being intellectually dishonest about statistics, you have to take multi-year averages in immigration, because any one year will have aberrations in particular programs. And what we do is we look at long-term averages, and our government has increased permanent immigration to Canada by 14% on average over the average of the previous government.
Well, if I can get into that, Mr. Minister, I mean, I did take a 5-year average, and I thought the best average would be your years in government. So I thought I would take the record since you formed government in 2006, and took the 5 years of years that we. Could I finish my question, please? To take the 5 years that we have figures for from your own department, and again, the math is there. In family class applications, you've dropped 14.6% in that time, and you've reduced the number every single year. 70,000, 66,000, 65,000, 65 less than 60,000. In spouses and partners, you've dropped 10%, dropping the family or the spousal visas every single year, 45.3 to 44.9 to 44.2, etc. 23.4% reduction in parent and grandparents, and even
it's all
children.
Wrong. It's all incorrect, Mr. Speaker.
So